At my son's wedding, they replaced my seat with a trash can. It's just a joke, Eleanor. Don't be so dramatic, my daughter-in-law said with a smile that never reached her eyes. Everyone around her laughed politely. A few people looked away. My son laughed too. Not loudly, not cruelly, just enough to let me know he wasn't going to stop it. I smiled back, because sometimes the deepest humiliation deserves the calmest response. The wedding venue sat on a hill overlooking a lake outside Burlington, Vermont. White roses lined the stone walkway. Crystal chandeliers glowed beneath a ceiling draped in ivory fabric. Everything looked beautiful. Everything except the place where the groom's mother was supposed to sit. I arrived 20 minutes before the ceremony, carrying a small velvet box that contained a family heirloom I planned to give Sabrina after the reception. It had belonged to my grandmother, then my mother, and finally me. 3 generations of women had protected it. I thought I was bringing a gift into the family. Instead, I walked into something else entirely. The usher handed me a seating card and pointed toward the front row. Right this way, ma'am. I followed him with a smile. Then I stopped. Every chair had a white satin ribbon tied neatly around the back. Every chair except one. In the place marked Mother of the Groom stood a small silver trash can with my name attached to it using a decorative card holder. For a moment, I thought someone had made a mistake. Then I heard the laughter. Not loud laughter. The kind people use when they want to pretend something isn't mean. Sabrina appeared beside me in her designer wedding gown, looking radiant and confident. There you are, she said cheerfully. Do you like it? I looked at the trash can. I'm sorry, she laughed. The seat. It's a joke. Everyone knows you have such a great sense of humor. Several bridesmaids giggled behind her. Jason walked over with a glass of sparkling water in his hand. Mom, don't take it seriously, he said. It's harmless. Harmless. Such a convenient word. I spent 37 years raising that boy. I worked double shifts after his father passed away. I packed lunches before sunrise. I attended every baseball game, every school concert, every graduation ceremony. Yet somehow, on the most important day of his adult life, I had become the punchline. Of course, I said softly. Just a joke. Relief crossed Jason's face. Sabrina squeezed his arm as though she had won something. Maybe she thought she had. I picked up my purse and quietly walked toward the back of the ceremony area. A young server rushed over and offered me a chair near a side aisle. I thanked him and sat down. The ceremony began. Music floated through the room. Guests smiled and dabbed at their eyes. I watched my son exchange vows with the woman he believed was the center of his future. I wished I could share their happiness. Instead, I found myself staring at the wedding program resting on my lap. That was when I noticed something strange. The guest list included dozens of names. Family friends, business associates, college roommates, distant cousins. But one name stood out. Michael Dawson, my late husband's attorney. I hadn't invited him. Jason hadn't mentioned him. Yet there it was, printed clearly among the honored guests. I looked across the room and spotted a gray-haired man standing near the back wall. The moment our eyes met, his expression changed. He gave me a small nod. Not a greeting, not a smile, a warning. And suddenly, the trash can no longer felt like the most important thing that had happened that day. The ceremony continued as if nothing unusual had happened. Guests smiled at the bride and groom, cameras flashed, and soft music drifted across the lake. From where I sat near the side aisle, I could see everything without being seen very much myself. It was a feeling I had become familiar with over the years. Not invisible exactly, but easy to overlook when someone more glamorous entered the room. Sabrina had mastered that skill. She knew how to command attention while making other people disappear. As the vows were exchanged, I found myself remembering a very different day nearly 30 years earlier. Jason was 8 years old and terrified before his first Little League game. He had stood beside me in our kitchen wearing a uniform 2 sizes too big, convinced everyone would laugh if he struck out. I had knelt beside him and told him something I hoped he would remember forever. The people who truly love you do not laugh when you are vulnerable. They stand beside you. Watching him now, I wondered if he remembered that conversation at all. When the ceremony ended, the guests moved toward the reception hall. The room overlooked the water through enormous floor-to-ceiling windows. Sunlight reflected off the lake and painted golden patterns across the hardwood floor. It should have felt warm. Instead, something about the atmosphere felt carefully staged, as though every smile had been rehearsed. I found my table assignment near the back corner of the room. It was not with family. It was not with close friends. It was beside a group of distant business acquaintances who barely knew my name. Again, I smiled and sat down. One of the women at the table leaned toward me. "I cannot believe how graceful you have been today," she whispered. Her husband quickly touched her arm, warning her to stop talking. The exchange lasted only a second, but it told me everything I needed to know. People had noticed. They simply did not want to get involved. During dinner, I watched Sabrina move from table to table accepting compliments. She looked delighted with herself. Every so often, her eyes drifted toward me. Each time, she seemed disappointed to find me calm. That realization gave me an unexpected sense of control. She wanted a reaction. She wanted tears, anger, embarrassment, something she could dismiss as oversensitivity. Refusing to give her that felt strangely satisfying. Halfway through the meal, I excused myself and stepped outside onto the terrace. The evening air felt cooler near the water. A gentle breeze carried the scent of pine trees from the hills beyond the lake. For the first time all day, I could think clearly. "Eleanor." The voice came from behind me. I turned and saw Michael Dawson approaching. He looked older than the last time I had seen him, but his steady expression had not changed. "I was hoping we could speak privately," he said. "Why are you here, Michael?" I asked. He glanced back toward the reception hall before answering. "Because your husband asked me to be." My heart skipped. My husband had been gone for nearly 11 years. "What are you talking about?" Michael reached into his jacket and removed a sealed envelope. The paper looked worn around the edges, as though it had been stored for a very long time. Written across the front in familiar handwriting were 3 simple words. "For Eleanor only." My breath caught in my throat. I knew that handwriting instantly. I had seen it on birthday cards, grocery lists, anniversary notes, and letters left on the refrigerator door during 34 years of marriage. Michael placed the envelope into my hands. "He instructed me not to deliver it unless certain circumstances developed," he said quietly. "After what I witnessed today, I believe those circumstances have arrived." I stared at the envelope for several seconds before opening it. Around us, laughter drifted from the reception hall. Glasses clinked. Music played softly through hidden speakers. The wedding celebration continued only a few yards away, yet standing on that terrace felt like stepping into a completely different world. My fingers trembled slightly as I broke the seal. Inside was a single handwritten letter. The date in the corner caught my attention immediately. My husband had written it less than 3 months before he passed away. "Eleanor, if you are reading this, something has happened that made Michael believe you need to know the truth." I paused and looked up at Michael. He remained silent, giving me space to continue. I read on. "For years, I have tried to protect our family without creating conflict. But there are things you deserve to know if the day ever comes when you are no longer treated with the respect you have earned." My chest tightened. Every word sounded exactly like him. Calm, careful, thoughtful. The letter explained that shortly before his death, he had reorganized certain family assets. Not because he expected trouble, but because he worried about how quickly good intentions could change when money entered the picture. He wrote about the house where Jason grew up, the property overlooking Lake Champlain that had been in his family for generations. The house everyone assumed belonged entirely to Jason one day. According to the letter, that assumption was not correct. Ownership of the property was tied to a family trust with conditions attached, conditions that had never been discussed publicly. I read the next paragraph twice to make sure I understood it correctly. "If any direct heir attempts to remove you from the property, pressure you to surrender your rights, or intentionally isolate you from family decisions involving the trust, control transfers immediately to you." I lowered the paper slowly. "What does this mean?" I asked. Michael folded his hands. "It means your husband anticipated the possibility that someone might eventually try to push you aside. Jason would never do that." The words left my mouth automatically. Yet even as I said them, memories from the past year began surfacing. Conversations that suddenly felt different. Questions about the house. Comments about downsizing. Suggestions that I did not need so much space anymore. Michael studied my expression carefully. "I hope you are right," he said. "But I think you already know why your husband created those protections." Before I could answer, the terrace door opened. I quickly folded the letter and slipped it into my purse. Olivia Reed stepped outside carrying her phone. She was Jason's cousin on his father's side, and one of the few young people in the family who still visited me regularly. "There you are," she said, sounding relieved. Then she noticed Michael. Oh, good. You found her. I frowned. What does that mean? Olivia exchanged a glance with Michael. Neither looked surprised to see the other. That alone made my stomach tighten. There is something you need to see, Olivia said quietly. Not here. Back inside. The reception had shifted into the first round of speeches. Guests were taking their seats again. Sabrina stood near the dance floor smiling for photographs. She looked completely comfortable, completely confident. Olivia guided me toward a quieter hallway near the conference rooms attached to the venue. Once we were alone, she unlocked her phone. I did not know if I should show you this, she admitted. But after what happened today, I cannot stay silent anymore. She turned the screen toward me. At first, it looked like an ordinary group chat. Bridesmaids, wedding planners, friends. Then I saw Sabrina's name. And beneath it, a message that made the blood drain from my face. The trash can idea is perfect. Maybe now she will finally understand that nobody wants her around. For several seconds, I simply stared at the screen. The hallway around me seemed to fade into the background. I could still hear distant laughter from the reception, the soft clinking of glasses, the music drifting through the walls, but all of it felt far away. My eyes remained fixed on Sabrina's message. Maybe now she will finally understand that nobody wants her around. There were dozens of replies beneath it. Some people had responded with laughing emojis. Others had suggested additional ideas. One bridesmaid wrote that the joke might be too harsh. Sabrina answered almost immediately. Do not worry. Jason never stands up to her anyway. The confidence in those words hurt more than the insult itself. Because she had been right. Olivia scrolled further down. The messages continued for weeks. I saw discussions about the seating chart. I saw conversations about family photographs. I saw Sabrina carefully arranging situations that would exclude me while making everything appear accidental. Each message felt like another piece of a puzzle clicking into place. Suddenly, memories from the past 3 years began resurfacing. The family vacation I somehow learned about after everyone had already left. The holiday dinner where my invitation had supposedly been lost in the mail. The birthday celebration that had been moved to a different restaurant at the last minute without anyone informing me. Every incident had seemed isolated. Every excuse had sounded reasonable. Looking at those messages, I realized none of it had been random. Olivia lowered the phone. I am sorry, she said quietly. I should have shown you sooner. I took a slow breath before answering. How long have you known? About 4 months. Why now? Her eyes filled with guilt. Because I thought Jason would eventually see what was happening. I kept hoping he would. But today, she glanced toward the reception hall. Today changed something. I understood exactly what she meant. There was a difference between private disrespect and public humiliation. One happened behind closed doors. The other required an audience. Sabrina had wanted witnesses. She had wanted people to laugh. That was what made it impossible to dismiss as a misunderstanding. Does anyone else know about these messages? I asked. Olivia nodded slowly. A few people. Most stayed quiet because they did not want drama before the wedding. I almost laughed at the irony. People often avoid discomfort in the present even when it guarantees greater damage later. Before I could respond, my phone vibrated. A text message from Jason appeared on the screen. Where are you? We are about to start the family photos. Family photos. The words felt strangely hollow. I looked at Olivia. Do you think Sabrina wants me in those pictures? Olivia hesitated. That hesitation told me everything. I should go, I said. As we walked back toward the ballroom, I felt different than I had an hour earlier. Not stronger exactly. Not yet. But clearer. The confusion was gone. The self-doubt was gone. For months I had questioned my own instincts. I had wondered whether I was imagining things. Whether I was becoming overly sensitive. Whether loneliness was making me misread situations. The messages answered all those questions. I was not imagining anything. The exclusion had been intentional. The disrespect had been deliberate. And somehow, knowing the truth felt easier than living with uncertainty. As we approached the ballroom entrance, Michael stepped out from a side corridor. He looked at me carefully, as though measuring whether I was ready for something. There is one more thing you need to know, he said quietly. Something your husband never wanted revealed unless it became absolutely necessary. I tightened my grip on my purse. Inside it rested the letter that had already changed everything. What is it? Michael glanced toward the crowded reception hall, where Sabrina stood smiling beneath the chandeliers. Then he looked back at me. Trust is not the most important thing your husband left behind. Michael waited until a group of guests passed before speaking again. The hallway remained busy, but nobody paid attention to three people standing quietly near the entrance. Weddings have a way of making everyone focus on what is directly in front of them. Nobody notices the conversations happening at the edges of the room. What did he leave behind? I asked. Michael studied me carefully. Evidence. The words settled heavily between us. Evidence of what? He glanced toward Olivia. She looked just as confused as I felt. Your husband spent the final years of his life documenting certain financial conversations, Michael said. At first he believed he was simply being cautious. Later, he became concerned. My stomach tightened. Concerned about whom? Not Jason. Relief came and went almost instantly. Then who? Michael lowered his voice. Sabrina. For a moment I could not respond. Not because I was surprised, but because hearing her name confirmed something I had been unwilling to admit. Michael continued. Several years ago, your husband noticed unusual questions. Questions about property ownership, insurance policies, trust documents, beneficiary designations. He thought curiosity was natural at first. Then the questions became more specific. Olivia frowned. How specific? Michael reached into his briefcase and removed a thin folder. Specific enough that he started keeping records. He handed me a document. The pages contained dates, notes, and summaries of conversations. Each entry had been written in my husband's careful handwriting. I immediately recognized it. One note described a family dinner where Sabrina repeatedly asked whether the lake house could be sold if ownership transferred to Jason. Another detailed a conversation about retirement communities and how quickly a property could be vacated after an elderly owner relocated. My chest felt cold. These were not dramatic accusations. They were ordinary conversations. That was what made them unsettling. Each question sounded harmless on its own. Together, they formed a pattern. Why did he never tell me? I asked quietly. Michael sighed. Because he hoped he was wrong. That answer sounded exactly like my husband. He had never been suspicious by nature. He believed people deserved the benefit of the doubt, even when evidence suggested otherwise. There is more, Michael said. He opened the folder to the final section. Inside was a notarized statement. Attached to it were copies of emails. My eyes widened as I read several names. Financial advisors, real estate consultants, property valuation specialists. Most of the inquiries had been made by Sabrina. None of them had been disclosed to me. She was planning something, Olivia whispered. Michael nodded slowly. We never had enough evidence to prove intent. But your husband believed she was building a roadmap. A roadmap? The phrase lingered in my mind. Not an emotional attack. Not a personal disagreement. A plan. The realization changed everything. Suddenly, today's humiliation no longer felt like an isolated act of cruelty. It felt strategic. If someone wanted to weaken your position inside a family, the first step was not removing your rights. The first step was removing your credibility. Make people laugh at you. Make people dismiss you. Make people believe your feelings are exaggerated. Once that happens, nobody questions what comes next. The ballroom doors opened again. Applause erupted from inside. Another speech had ended. Sabrina's laughter floated through the room. Bright, confident, completely unaware of the conversation happening only a few yards away. I slipped the documents back into the folder and handed it to Michael. What happens now? I asked. He looked directly at me. That depends entirely on you. For the first time all evening, I realized something important. Everyone else had been making decisions about my life for years. Sabrina, Jason, even well-meaning relatives who chose silence over conflict. But standing there with my husband's letter in my purse and the truth finally laid out in front of me, I understood that the next decision belonged to me alone. I returned to the reception with a calm expression that surprised even me. An hour earlier, I had arrived expecting to celebrate my son's wedding. Now I carried knowledge that changed the way I saw nearly every interaction around me. Yet the strange thing about clarity is that it often brings peace before it brings action. I no longer needed to guess what was happening. I no longer needed to wonder whether I was imagining things. The truth had finally stepped into the light. As I entered the ballroom, Jason spotted me immediately. Mom, there you are, he said, walking over with visible relief. We have been looking everywhere. His tone was warm enough that, for a brief moment, I saw the little boy he used to be. The child who would run to the front window every afternoon when he heard my car pull into the driveway after work. The child who once believed I could solve any problem. I am sorry, I said gently. I needed some fresh air. He nodded and glanced toward the dance floor where Sabrina was greeting guests. Everything okay? The question lingered between us. Everything okay? I wondered how many times people asked that question without truly wanting the answer. I am fine, I replied. And in a way, it was true. For the first time in years, I felt anchored. Jason smiled and returned to the celebration. I watched him go, feeling a sadness that had nothing to do with anger. He had spent so long avoiding conflict that he no longer recognized it when it stood directly in front of him. Sabrina joined him moments later. She slipped her arm through his and whispered something that made him laugh. Then her eyes found mine across the room. For a split second, her smile faltered. Perhaps she sensed something had changed. Perhaps she simply did not understand why I looked so calm. Either way, she looked away first. Dinner was ending now. Servers cleared plates while guests prepared for the evening speeches. Conversations filled the room. Some people were discussing travel plans. Others shared old family stories. Yet beneath the ordinary noise, I noticed something different. People were watching. Not openly, not rudely, but carefully. Word had spread. The seating incident had not gone unnoticed. Neither had my reaction. A woman from a nearby table approached me quietly. I just wanted to say you handled yourself with remarkable grace today. Before I could respond, she touched my arm gently and walked away. 10 minutes later, an older gentleman stopped beside me. Your husband was a good man, he said. He would have been proud of you. Then he disappeared back into the crowd. Small moments. Simple words. Yet together they revealed something important. Sabrina may have controlled the joke. She did not control the room. People notice more than we think. They simply take longer to speak than we wish. As the master of ceremonies announced the next portion of the evening, I glanced toward the head table. Sabrina looked confident again. Jason looked happy. The guests settled into their seats. Then I noticed something unexpected. Michael had moved from the back of the room to a chair much closer to the stage. Olivia sat beside him. Both looked unusually focused, almost prepared. A quiet feeling settled into my chest. The evening was approaching a turning point. I did not know exactly how events would unfold, but I could sense the direction changing. Across the room, Sabrina raised a champagne glass and laughed at something one of her bridesmaids said. She looked completely certain of her victory. And that certainty, more than anything else, convinced me she had no idea what was coming next. The master of ceremonies stepped onto the stage and tapped the microphone. Conversations gradually faded. Guests returned to their seats. The evening had reached the portion everyone anticipated most, the speeches. A large screen behind the dance floor displayed photographs of Jason and Sabrina throughout their relationship. Smiling vacations, holiday gatherings, engagement pictures taken beside mountain trails and autumn trees. The audience watched with warm expressions. I watched something else. I watched people. I noticed who avoided eye contact with me. I noticed who glanced in my direction with sympathy. I noticed Olivia sitting perfectly still beside Michael. Neither appeared relaxed. They looked like people waiting for a train they could already hear approaching. The best man spoke first. His speech was lighthearted and well-received. The maid of honor followed with stories from college and heartfelt wishes for the future. Laughter filled the room. Applause followed. Sabrina looked radiant beneath the soft lighting. Every photograph taken that evening would show a confident bride enjoying a perfect celebration. Then the master of ceremonies smiled and adjusted his notes. Next, we would like to invite the groom's mother to share a few words. A ripple moved through the room. I saw surprise on several faces. Apparently many guests had assumed I would not be included. Jason smiled and gestured toward the stage. Come on, Mom. His expression carried genuine affection. For a moment, that made everything harder. I stood slowly and walked toward the microphone. The room grew quiet. Hundreds of eyes followed me across the dance floor. I placed my hands lightly on the podium and looked out over the crowd. The chandeliers reflected in dozens of wine glasses. Beyond the windows, the lake had darkened into a sheet of black glass beneath the evening sky. Thank you all for being here, I began. My voice sounded calm, steadier than I felt. Today has reminded me of many things. It reminded me of the day Jason was born. It reminded me of his first day of school, his first baseball game, his college graduation. Jason smiled. Several guests nodded along. Being a parent means spending years hoping your child grows into someone kind, honest, and strong. You accept that one day they will build a life of their own. You simply hope they carry the right values with them. The room remained attentive. Sabrina maintained her polished smile. I continued. My husband believed deeply in those values. He believed character mattered most when nobody was watching. At the mention of my husband, I noticed Michael straighten slightly in his chair. Before he passed away, he left behind several letters. Letters intended for specific moments. Sabrina's smile faded almost imperceptibly. Jason looked confused. One of those letters came into my possession today. Complete silence settled across the ballroom. I reached into my purse and withdrew the envelope. Guests exchanged curious glances. Sabrina turned toward Jason. He looked just as surprised as everyone else. The letter contains advice, I said. Advice about family, about integrity, about what to do when respect begins disappearing one small piece at a time. No one moved. No one spoke. Even the servers had stopped walking between tables. I looked directly at Jason, then at Sabrina. My husband always said that truth has remarkable timing. It waits quietly until the moment people are finally ready to hear it. Across the room, Olivia lowered her eyes. Michael folded his hands together. Sabrina sat perfectly still. And for the first time all evening, I saw something new in her expression. Not confidence, not amusement, concern. The silence in the ballroom felt almost physical. Nobody reached for a glass. Nobody checked a phone. Every eye remained fixed on the stage. I unfolded the letter carefully and looked down at the familiar handwriting. For a moment, I could almost hear my husband's voice. There is a passage I would like to share, I said. Not because it is about money, not because it is about property, but because it is about family. I began reading. If you are hearing these words, Eleanor, then something has changed. Perhaps people have forgotten that respect is not earned through age alone. It is earned through sacrifice, loyalty, and character. The people who benefit most from your kindness may someday convince themselves it was always owed to them. If that day comes, remember this. Their behavior is a reflection of them, not of you. The room remained perfectly still. I lowered the letter and looked at the guests. Several people had tears in their eyes. Others stared at the tablecloths in uncomfortable silence. My husband wrote those words many years ago, I continued. At the time, I did not understand why he felt the need to write them. Today I do. Across the room, Sabrina's posture had become noticeably rigid. Jason glanced between her and me, confusion spreading across his face. Earlier this evening, I said, I learned something important. I learned that some moments are not accidents. Some exclusions are not misunderstandings. Some jokes are not really jokes. A murmur moved through the audience. Sabrina immediately reached for her glass. Her hand was steady, but her smile had disappeared completely. For a long time, I questioned my own instincts, I said. When invitations disappeared, when plans changed, when family photographs somehow happened without me, I assumed there must be reasonable explanations. I paused. Today, I discovered there were explanations. They simply were not reasonable. Jason sat forward in his chair. Mom, he began quietly. I raised a gentle hand, not to silence him, only to ask for a moment more. I am not interested in embarrassing anyone, I said. The truth does not need help creating consequences. It does that on its own. Then I looked toward Olivia. She stood slowly. Every head in the room turned. Olivia walked to the edge of the dance floor, carrying her phone. She looked nervous, but determined. I wish I did not have to do this, she said. But I think people deserve to understand why Eleanor is standing here tonight. Sabrina's face went pale. Olivia, sit down, she said sharply. Olivia did not move. Instead, she connected her phone to the presentation screen already being used for wedding photographs. A second later, an image appeared behind me. The group chat, the same one I had seen in the hallway. Guests squinted at the screen. Then they began reading. The room grew even quieter. Message after message appeared. Comments about excluding me from events. Jokes at my expense. Discussions about making me feel unwelcome. Nobody spoke. Nobody laughed. The same guests who had chuckled earlier now looked stunned. Jason stood up so abruptly that his chair scraped against the floor. His eyes moved across the screen. Then back to Sabrina. Then back to the screen again. What is this? He asked. Sabrina opened her mouth, but no words came out. Olivia displayed another message. Then another. Each one made the situation harder to dismiss, harder to explain away, harder to pretend was harmless. Finally, Michael Dawson rose from his seat. He stepped forward calmly, carrying the folder I had seen earlier. "I am an attorney," he said, "and I can verify that concerns regarding these patterns of behavior were documented years ago." A collective gasp moved through the ballroom. Jason looked as though the ground beneath him had shifted. Sabrina stared at the floor. And for the first time all evening, nobody was looking at me with pity. They were looking at me with understanding. No one seemed to know what to do next. The ballroom that had been filled with laughter only minutes earlier now felt suspended in silence. Jason remained standing beside his chair, staring at the screen as if reading the messages a second time might somehow change them. Sabrina finally looked up. "Jason, I can explain," she said softly. But even she sounded uncertain. Not frightened, not emotional, simply uncertain, as though she had never imagined a moment where everyone could see what she had written. Jason turned toward her. "Explain what?" he asked. "Explain which part?" His voice was not angry. That was what made it so painful to hear. It sounded disappointed, deeply disappointed, the kind of disappointment that only comes when trust breaks. Sabrina searched the room for support, but found none. The bridesmaids who had laughed earlier were staring at their laps. Guests avoided eye contact. Even the people who cared about her seemed unsure what to say. I stepped away from the microphone. My part was finished. I had not come to destroy anyone. I had simply refused to remain silent. Michael closed the folder and returned it to his briefcase. Olivia disconnected her phone from the presentation screen. The evidence no longer needed to be displayed. Everyone had seen enough. Jason slowly sat back down. He rubbed his forehead and stared at the table for several moments. Then he looked at me. "Mom," he said quietly. It was the same word he had used all evening. Yet somehow it sounded different now. He looked older, more aware. "I am sorry." Those 3 words echoed through the room more powerfully than any speech. I smiled gently. "I know." And I did. Because in that moment, I could see that he finally understood what he had refused to see before. Understanding does not erase mistakes, but it changes what happens next. The reception ended much earlier than planned. Guests left quietly. Some approached me before leaving. A few apologized for laughing. Others admitted they had noticed things over the years but convinced themselves they were misunderstandings. I thanked them and wished them safe travels home. There was no satisfaction in being proven right, only relief. 3 months later, I sat on the porch of the lake house watching sunlight dance across the water. Autumn had arrived. The trees along the shoreline glowed red and gold beneath a clear blue sky. Life felt peaceful again. Not perfect, peaceful. Jason visited every Sunday now. Sometimes we talked for hours. Sometimes we simply sat together and watched the lake. Healing takes time. Neither of us tried to rush it. Sabrina was no longer part of those visits. The marriage had not survived the truth. That decision belonged to them, not me. I never celebrated it. I never criticized her. Some consequences arrived naturally without anyone helping them along. One afternoon, Jason handed me a small box. Inside was the family heirloom I had planned to give away on his wedding day. "You should keep it," he said. "It belongs with you." I closed the lid and smiled. "Maybe someday," I replied, "when the right person is ready." He nodded. Together we watched the lake in comfortable silence. Sometimes I think back to that evening and remember the laughter. I remember the glances. I remember how small they try to make me feel. But when those memories return, they no longer hurt. Because the most important thing I learned that day had nothing to do with humiliation. It had nothing to do with property, trust documents, or family politics. It was simpler than that. Respect can be hidden. Kindness can be overlooked. Truth can be delayed. But eventually, character reveals itself. Not in the moments when everything is easy, but in the moments when everyone is watching. And in the end, the seat that mattered most was never the one they tried to take away. It was the place I kept for myself by refusing to forget my own worth.